Hey guys, tonight we open a rather strange box from history, one filled not with jewels or letters, but with hats. And not just any hats. These belonged to the stern men of the medieval courts, the judges who presided over trials, scribbled their verdicts with quills, and yes, sometimes switched their headwear before a person was led to the scaffold. You wouldn't think fabric and feathers could matter so much to the machinery of justice, but in the centuries before powdered wigs and polished gavels, a hat could carry a weight heavier than the verdict itself. You imagine the scene, a stone courtroom, smoky with torchlight, smelling faintly of wax, wool cloaks damp from the rain outside. At the front sits the judge, cloaked in authority. And what draws your eye isn't the parchment on his desk or the iron keys to the dungeon. No, it's the hat. A crown-like fur piece, its edges embroidered with golden thread, casting a little shadow over his tired eyes. You could say, this is his uniform. Without it, he's just another medieval bureaucrat. With it, he becomes something between a priest and a king. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in that courtroom. The boredom would finish you before the verdict did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fun to imagine this sleepy little community scattered across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trail your thoughts deeper into this quiet courtroom, watching as the judge tilts his hat ever so slightly. It isn't just a flourish, it's a symbol. Historians note that medieval hats weren't merely fashion, they acted like miniature billboards of authority. Some were velvet, some were fur-lined, and some bristled with stiff felt that made them sit tall and proud. But the oddest detail, the one that makes you smirk just a little, is that judges were known to keep separate hats for different occasions. One for ordinary trials, another for ceremonial events, and rather unsettlingly, a special hat for days of execution. Mainstream accounts from legal history confirm this. Courtroom attire was as carefully regulated as armor on the battlefield. The quirky tidbit? Some judges became so attached to their favorite hats that they refused to appear in court without them, even if the hat looked ridiculous with age. Imagine an old moth-eaten cap carrying more legal weight than a stack of law books. Historians still argue whether this was a matter of tradition or superstition. Was the hat truly necessary for authority, or just a comforting habit for men asked to hand down grim decisions? And so you picture it, the first crack of dawn, creeping through stained glass, a judge yawning, reaching for his robe, and finally settling that precious hat onto his head. Not too tilted, not too straight, just enough to remind everyone that today, in this chamber of stone, his words will shape someone's fate. You lean a little closer, as if the torchlight flickers brighter on the judge's brow. The truth is, hats weren't merely an accessory in medieval courts. They were instruments of performance, almost like props in a play. The audience, whether townsfolk packed shoulder to shoulder or anxious nobles sitting stiff-backed on benches, looked for cues in the judge's attire. You might not know the finer points of Latin legal jargon, but you'd certainly recognize when the man in the fur cap was about to pronounce something final. One mainstream fact here is that medieval law was deeply theatrical. The judge was both arbiter and actor, embodying the weight of the king's justice in the way he dressed and moved. Official documents survive describing the cap of justice or cappa, part of the required regalia. But then comes the odd little wrinkle. In some accounts, the hat doubled as a sort of signal flag. A slight adjustment forward might mean deliberations were over. A tilt to the side execution orders incoming. Was it really that intentional? Historians still argue whether these gestures were formalized or just quirks picked up by nervous crowds desperate for meaning. The quirky detail that makes you grin is this. Judges often treated their hats as personal relics, carrying them home and storing them in scented chests like holy garments. One chronicler even mentions a judge who scolded his servant for setting a jug of ale too close to his cap of final judgment. Imagine that a grown man, commanding in court, suddenly panicking that beer froth might splash on his brim. It takes some of the menace out of the role, doesn't it? You picture yourself standing outside the courtroom, leaning against the wall, overhearing muffled voices. Inside, the judge adjusts his hat with an almost imperceptible touch, and the crowd rustles like wind in dry leaves. Nobody dares laugh. Nobody dares move. You'd probably get restless, shuffle your feet, wonder how many hours you'd need to sit there before someone read out a sentence. The slow-motion pacing of medieval justice is enough to make even the keenest spectator nod off perfect for you tonight. And here's where superstition creeps in. Some believe the judge's hat absorbed authority the way incense absorbs smoke. Wear the same cap long enough, and it radiated gravitas on its own. That's why replacements were rare. Why risk losing the magic of a tried and true brim? Yet scholars still puzzle over whether this belief was widespread or just the eccentricity of a few hat-loving magistrates. It's another scholarly debate left open like an old case file. So the image lingers, wool, velvet, and fur pressed close to a forehead, catching candlelight, holding centuries of silent power. And you, lulled by the thought, settle deeper into the idea that justice once came not with a gavel strike, but with the solemn tilt of a favorite hat. Why mid-morning? The court is fully awake, and so are the judges. You step inside one of those vaulted chambers, the kind with echoing ceilings and drafty stone walls that smell faintly of ink, sweat, and damp wool. The air is heavy with murmurs, clerks scratching on parchment, scribes dipping their quills, and townsfolk waiting for rulings that could determine their livelihoods. The judges arrive in procession, their hats perched proudly as if each were its own crown. The mainstream fact here is that medieval judges didn't just wear hats, they wore them as part of a full outfit that marked their authority. Robes were dyed in deep blacks or crimson hues depending on the court and the rank. Hats were the final flourish, signaling not only dignity but also continuity with older traditions of Roman magistrates who likewise favored distinctive headwear. The quirky tidbit, though, is that some hats weren't just symbolic, they were practical. In certain chilly northern courts, judges lined the inside of their caps with fur to keep their heads warm during long, drafty trials. Imagine passing judgment on a theft case while secretly worrying about your ears freezing off. Some judges even kept a second hat at their feet, swapping midday when the sun warmed the courtroom a little too much. It's essentially the medieval version of having both a winter hat and a summer hat in your car.